So sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, please
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
So our mechanism fills a niche in the appropriate response. There are so many areas that need to be filled, and some of these have already been mentioned. Humanitarian, obviously, people need to be fed. When you start about worrying about people's welfare, they need to have nourishment so that they can live and children can grow. But there are many other factors: the political future of Myanmar, the issue of how citizenship rights. But one niche, a very important one, is this issue of the end of impunity and building towards accountability for those most responsible for crimes in Myanmar. I think there's a recognition around the country of Myanmar that is particularly since the coup, where people are realizing these things that happen to different ethnicities on the borders of Myanmar and things that happen to the Rohingya. The way the military is treating the bomber and the population right now is not so different. These are the same strategies of targeting civilians, targeting the population that they used against Rohingya and other groups in Myanmar. So there's a recognition that when the military has gotten away with this for so many years, for so many decades, they believe, of course, that this is something they can do and get away with. So it's very important for the future of Myanmar to set a precedent that there will be accountability, that this process won't be forgotten. And hopefully we contribute to that by collecting our evidence and providing courts and the judicial authorities with our analysis of that evidence.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, for sharing what the IIMM is doing, also highlighting the importance of ending impunity in Burma. And to our audience, after our speakers, our panelists provide their remarks, and we'll have plenty of time to have a Q&A, questions and answers. So please think about the questions you would like to ask, and perhaps you can drop the questions in the chat, or you can raise hand and ask later. So now, Andrea, on behalf of the organizer, I would like to thank you and the Holocaust Memorial Museum in ensuring that never again is also applied to the Rohingya community. Indeed, the museum's special exhibitions, Burma's Path to Genocide, has been incredibly vital in raising awareness of the Rohingya genocide, resulting in the US government to make the genocide determination last year. In your opinion, what the US as a country do to implement the determination, whether by the government or by the Congress or other actors, and what international community should be doing to end impunity? Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Wei Wei, for organizing this powerful event, and thank you to my fellow panelists. It's an honor to be with you. As you know, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum teaches the Holocaust was preventable, and that by teaching about early warning signs and having the resources to take early action, that individuals and governments can save lives. So what you mentioned, Wei Wei, about the exhibition, Burma's Path to Genocide, tells this story about what happened to the Rohingya people. We know that genocide is not spontaneous. It's a long process for which there are warning signs. So at a fundamental level, this exhibition helps teach people that genocide did not end with the Holocaust. It still happens today. It's preventable, and it looks at the experiences of Rohingya survivors and their experiences up until today. We also think this exhibition can guard against genocide denial, something that the Burmese military and leaders are perpetuating. And so exhibitions like this is one way of establishing a historical record. I would also like to share that this exhibition is not just a product of the museum. Rohingya researchers, experts, activists contributed to this, and this really is a reflection of a lot of the hard work that really came from Rohingya survivors and Rohingya community leaders. This exhibition focuses on experiences of survivors from Mongno, so just one village in northern Rakhine State, but we can extrapolate the harm that is described by those survivors over this broader population that was terrorized. And the genocide determination that you mentioned, Wei Wei, about Secretary Blinken's statement, that was meaningful. It reflected what Rohingya leaders and community members had been saying for years. And And so this, again, just want to recognize the really valuable inputs of the Rohingya people into this. A determination like this is not a goal. It's never an end goal. It's rather a somber acknowledgement of our collective failure to prevent genocide, but is meaningful, and it should not end policy discussions around genocide prevention or response. It should reflect reflections on failures to date, and also some thought about what our obligations are now to protect the Rohingya community. And when we think about atrocity prevention, even in a case where mass atrocities are unfolding, we can think about some general approaches. So we can deter the perpetrators. These perpetrators have seen to be relatively impervious to acts of deterrence. But something we can do is reduce the capacity of perpetrators to commit these crimes. And what we're
Oh, I think we lost her. I guess we should just go to the next speaker, Yasmin, and we'll come back with Andrea when she's able to get on the Zoom. So lastly, Yasmin, Sister Yasmin, I'm always so inspired by young, outspoken leaders like you who truly care about our community and our fellow women. This is despite the experience in the past 6 years since 2017 attack of genocide in our home, Arkan, and decades of persecutions against our community. Based on your experience, what are some practical steps that international community should take today towards a just and sustainable and durable solution? And you're just in Aceh, Indonesia, meeting the refugees there. If you can share about your experience there as well, but more importantly, if you could answer what should be done now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Weiwei, and thank you again to everyone who's here. I'm so honored to share the panel with the esteemed panelists. I have lost a little bit of my voice, so pardon me if I'm not as clear as usual. I am visiting and currently doing some advocacy in Jakarta. We just came back from Aceh a few days back, and I've accompanied 4 other brilliant Rohingya sisters to visit the camp, to check in on our brothers and sisters there. Although Aceh is not the only settlement of Rohingya across Indonesia, there are many other, blind spots, as I have mentioned to Weiwei in our private conversation, that actually exist all throughout the region. I think that in terms of an understanding that needs to be established in the international community is that it should view Rohingya issue interconnected to Myanmar-Burma issue. And I've said this already so many times, and I think Weiwei have said the same thing, but it bears repeating that there should not be a separation of these two because they are interconnected. The same perpetrators are perpetrating the violence against other ethnic communities and perpetrating human rights violation across Burma, Myanmar. Those are some of the things that I have experienced whenever I actually advocate for our country or for specifically for Rohingya. It boggles my mind that we have to even repeat this, that our issues is not actually viewed in a wholesome, holistic way. It is really difficult when we break down the issues of humanitarianism or issue of human rights and other issues into smaller pieces and not connecting them together. Impunity is connected to business and human rights. It also is interconnected to targeting of women and girls, especially in sexual and gender-based violence that also affect LGBTQ+ communities within our own communities. So all of these intertwining issues need to have one streamline, needs to have an actual analysis that goes into each intersecting areas. And it seems so complicated at first, but for us as advocates, we are seeing this as a full picture. We are seeing the humanitarian issue in Bangladesh as a replication of genocide that's ongoing. The starvation of Rohingya in Cox's Bazar are interconnected to the pilot project that's being imposed. It is being imposed. It actually is a forcibly removal or return of people without ensuring dignity, without ensuring sustainability, without ensuring voluntary return. The issue is we've just learned very recently that Cox's Bazar is actually deemed quite valuable now in terms of land. There is a potential proposal that a Chinese company is going to build a Sitwe Cox's Bazar corridor. And it is, you know, the Rohingya refugees are sitting on the piece of land that is so needed. In the meantime, this pilot project is being pushed in order to, you know, repatriate people back, in order to develop this area. We've seen the same thing happen before in Chakpyu. The deep sea port was, you know, initially started in 2011-12. And Rakhine environmental groups actually try to oppose it. But then right away we hear, you know, of the conflict or, you know, the campaigns that started in 2011-12 against Rohingya. All of this are circular, and it feels like other entities, especially in the international community, are not catching on really fast. It seems like we're seeing the same repetition over and over again, like the same movie. And I feel quite defeated whenever I have to keep explaining that they're all interconnected. So I'm hoping that in some ways we're able to actually step a little bit away from you know, looking at things at a very small level or in specific areas, and actually put them together, connect them back together, because they are intertwining, because the Myanmar military are doing things purposefully, and they're all, you know, going back to the same root cause, which is that Rohingya are actually barriers to profits and to the idea that they would be able to further dispossess and, you know, put money into their pockets. Let me just put it, you know, simply. Now, back to the points that I want to make in terms of our visit in Aceh. The reason why I also, you know, brought along 4 other wonderful young women who have been leaders in their own rights is because I realized that we actually don't get enough support to actually bond, to actually connect with other Rohingya advocates. And this is, you know, something that the international community constantly criticizes us for. We're always criticized that we're not united. But in terms of, you know, in reality, we are trying, but there's so many competition within, you know, humanitarianism, within grants, within various different aspects of work that actually divides us. We're seen as competing with those in the camps to get grants to work on the ground. We're seen as, you know, when funds are limited, we're seen as competing with other Rohingya in the diaspora to work. All of our works are meaningful. We need all hands on decks. But the international community is not providing the support that we actually need in order to do the work that we, you know, that is required to actually rebuild our community, to lift up our community. And that, you know, goes to show, especially in the Aceh situation, as I have said, that it is a blind spot. There currently, well, let me just give you a little bit of the stats. There have been 27 flow of people arriving in Aceh. Most of them were destined to go to Thailand or Malaysia, but some of them have been pushed back to the sea, and they basically were pushed to the direction of Sumatra or Aceh. Some of them have arrived, some of them have drowned. This is a reality, and unfortunately, we're not quite aware of the of the connection of human trafficking and the desperation that communities like mine have in order to leave violence, in order to leave restrictive livelihood, as Shayna have already mentioned, especially in terms of food rations and humanitarian aid. This batch of people who are now in Aceh are currently 80 children, of whom 10 are allowed to go to school with actual permission from Ministry of Education. The rest are adults. Half are women, half are men. All of them have been feeling extremely hopeless. All of the, the resounding words that they've told me was that, especially in women and men that we talked to, they said that they came here seeking opportunities for their children. They just want an ability to access education. And even at that, they're not able to actually access it all. Only 10 children are currently having real permission to go to school. Whereas some authorities and some, lacking of coordination have caused these children to be stopped at the security level. So this is something that actually is a manifestation of what happens overall in the international community. There's a clear lack of coordination in justice mechanism, in humanitarianism, in human rights spaces. We're not coordinated. How do you actually explain that? And how do you, point the finger back at the community for not being consolidated? Is it really our fault that we are not, when we are separated by the system, when we're kind of divided by the funding that is so limited? It shows that the international community is not serious about fixing this issue. So I would implore upon our audience, upon those who are actually working in this area, to actually look at all of those blind spots, connect the dots, actually try to connect them, and understanding intersectionality goes further, deeper, and you have to explore it every day. Apart from all of this, I would like to still kind of touch upon, the humanitarian aid. I think it's important. We just came out of a few meetings that we've had with Aman Indonesia and a few other stakeholders in Indonesia who may have some funding and some resources to provide, at least for those in Aceh. And we're really hopeful that the students or the young children in the camps would at least secure their spots in one of these schools and are able to actually, access education freely without being disrupted, because we've had 3 lost generations, and that is enough for a community to bear. I think, and I'm borrowing the words of the former AHA Center executive director here, her name is Adelina Kamal, some of you may know her. She said the international community should not be absorbed or obsessed with the notion of access or direct access. There are ways to work, there are ways to make humanitarian aid work, even if the community is being, challenged, even if the access to Arakan state is being challenged, even if there is a ban imposed. You can still work with people. You can still give money directly to the people who actually lead the initiatives themselves. I just implore, I plead with you to have more trust in the community, because we are the ones who actually uplifted this community. We're the ones who have survived all this time. We're the ones who've been helping each other. It is not the money that comes from your pockets. It is not the money that comes from the international community. Most of those are unaccounted for. Most of those did not go directly to people who actually are in need of help. So let's not play games anymore. Let's actually direct the fundings to the people if you're serious about ending this issue, if you're serious about ending genocide and impunity. Let's focus on not working with the military junta. At the very least, let's do that. And lastly, I would like to talk about representation, and I will not take more time than this. I think that it bears repeating that the international community should not engage in any discussion that involve our livelihood in Myanmar, Burma, or other region that Rohingya resides in, without involving us from the start. If you don't involve us from the start, you might as well be complicit in the process of genocide, because the precursors to it is actually alienation and exclusionary practices. If you really are serious about helping us, let us represent ourselves. I'm going to borrow a word of my dear sister Hafsa, who is currently the Co-Secretary General of APRN, Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network. She said, we have capacity, no need for building capacity. We have enough capacity to build it ourselves. Our people have not been, helpless and waiting for help. We're just prevented, excluded from the process of being able to realize those plans. We don't get enough money. We don't get enough help to actually let us kickstart the process. So please do not engage in any discussions that involves us, that we don't actually, we are not there at the table from the get-go. And I will leave it at that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Yasmin. I will not repeat your wonderful points, and thank you for highlighting the gaps in international responses. I'm afraid, if I repeat your points, I'll be taking a lot of time. So I'll just go back to Andrea and give her time to complete her remark and response. So Andrea.
Thank you, Wei Wei, and apologies for the interruption, and thank you for your patience. If it meant that we got to Yasmin's comments earlier, perhaps it was a good thing for all. But I'll be brief. I think I was talking about the genocide determination, that recognition of our failures, and how that should prompt not just reflection on the past, but also thoughtful policy processes to think about going forward. And so when we think about atrocity prevention, again, I mentioned, I think briefly, deterrence. This is a perpetrator, the Burmese military, that seems shameless in its actions. It doesn't seem to, at this point, care about trying to seem like a benevolent force for the country. But there still are other general areas in which we can work in order to prevent future atrocities and halt the ones that are occurring. So in terms of reducing the capacity of perpetrators, if we can't dissuade them, trying to make sure that they have less capability to inflict serious harm on their own people. There's the recent announcement from the U.S. Treasury about the sanctioning ability for companies operating in the jet fuel sector. And this can, if effectively implemented and if done in a coordinated fashion, could help cut off this resource that the military has been using to kill civilians. There have been sanctions, thinking about U.S. action, there have been sanctions on entities, on banks, on individuals, and this can also help stem the flow of funds to those perpetrators who might use those funds to inflict massive amounts of harm. But more, of course, can be done. All of these efforts so far have not been successful in stemming the violence. So making sure that the military just does not have the capability to further its illegal and very violent campaigns against the people of Burma. So increased pressure is helpful, and really this needs to be a coordinated effort. Your question was about what the U.S. can do, and the U.S. should continue to do this. But other countries really need to do this as well, so that there's a coordinated effort to really restrict the ability of the Burmese military to commit mass atrocities. We can also think about protecting civilians, and all of my fellow panelists have highlighted the plight of Rohingya communities today. But more can be done both within Burma today for communities beyond Rohingya who are facing attack. Communities in Burma are no stranger to mass atrocities. The military has been attacking civilians for decades. So support from the U.S. and others, from other donors, to assist in early warning systems and in self-protection is helpful. There can be more done to strengthen these community-led efforts. I should note that it should not be necessary for communities to protect themselves. There's always more that government should be doing to uphold their responsibilities. But given the networks that already exist for communities who very much know what they're doing, they deserve support. Also stressing the importance for protection of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh who face rampant insecurity, and Shane and Yasmin spoke about that, who cannot safely return home. They should be able to live safely in Bangladesh and pursue a peaceful future. They should also be able to go home safely in the future, and should be able to find refuge elsewhere in the meantime. And finally, this has been mentioned by a number of other panelists, but it's important to support Rohingya-led justice efforts. We heard about the work of the IIMM and what's happening with the case at the ICJ and the investigation at the ICC. There's the case led by Tunkin in Argentina, where Rohingya witnesses recently testified in demands from the Rohingya community for reparation for the genocide, the harm inflicted upon them. That's necessary, and support for these various efforts will be needed for the long term. There are local groups who are doing immense work documenting what has happened. So what happened with the genocide of the Rohingya, and also what is happening now in terms of ongoing mass atrocities. And there should be deepened support for that. This is not a one-year-long project. Sadly, the pursuit of justice is long and requires sustained support. And the people who do this work, including many of the people who are activists, who are involved in advancing the cause of justice, they do this work at great risk. They deserve protection. And just recognizing, taking a step back, that the Rohingya people, including those displaced in Bangladesh or in Southeast Asia, they are survivors of genocide. They deserve protection and comprehensive assistance. Their demands, as Yasmin mentioned, should influence policy decisions. That it goes for conversations in Washington, within the U.S. and elsewhere. The Rohingya have been fighting for justice. They have allies, and the U.S. needs to demonstrate its long-term commitment to being a steadfast ally for the long term, supporting civil society groups and leaders along the way. This will need to be an ongoing effort. I'll just end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for highlighting the policy response, a more long-term commitment and the comprehensive policy response, a coordinated policy response that required within the U.S. and among the international community. Indeed, the recent sanctions against the banks and aviation fuel, etc., the U.S. government has been, the actions that U.S. government has been taking, all of them are commendable. However, there is a lot more to be done. And there's a lot more coordination need to be done, and it has to be a long-term commitment. Thank you so much for highlighting those points. Now that we would like to give floor to the audience. Indeed, I'm actually I'm going to choose some questions, relevant questions to the panels, and if panelists, if you whoever want to take the questions, please feel free to take. Right now, thank you so much, everyone who put in the comments, responses, and questions on the chat box. First of all, I would like to take questions from the Miwako Hosoda. What do the Rohingya in the Cox's Bazar refugee camps and diaspora think of Myanmar in current situations? And do you still have a hope to return to Myanmar? I hope our sister Yasmin could take that questions, or later on we have our Rohingya sister from Bangladesh join in, so she might be able to answer during her remark. Okay, and another question, it's from Zafar Ahmad Abdul Ghani. Until now, the hate speech, xenophobia, threats, and harassment continue. Nothing can stop this. Everyone is silent. What will happen next? Nobody knows. I believe he's referring to the hate speech against the refugees in Malaysia and in diaspora. And another question: what is your from anonymous attendants, what is your reaction to Wimya's recent apology? Do you think he and Kimama Myu, Minister of Commerce, should be thrown out of the NUG? I think I will take one more question for this round. Probably we can have two rounds of questions, and before we close the panel, James Joseph. What more can we do to support survivors and community-led effort for civilians, for truth and justice, and post-atrocity community healing, including Rohingya-led justice effort by survivors and for survivors, including sustaining support. I guess he's asking about what more can we do to support the survivor-led effort in general, and throughout the justice and reconciliation processes perhaps if anyone want to touch up on transitional justice as well. I'll leave here, and we will have one round of question, and then we will close the panel.
I think I can go first,
Yeah,
since a couple of questions addressing Rohingya directly. Again, I claim no part of being, the sole representation or the appropriate representation at that. I mean, by no means am I a leader. I'm just an activist. But I think the sentiment is shared, and that is what I observed among those in the community, in the camps, in Cox's Bazar, those who are in the country, in Arakan State, or those who are, displaced in Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and elsewhere. They're constantly displacement replicated everywhere. There were cases that I've heard in Aceh specifically, since we just had the visit, of women being sold into, women arriving to Malaysia and then being sold into forced labor or sexual slavery. And some women fortunately made their ways to Indonesia. So they're already displacement after they go to Bangladesh, and then there's another displacement after they go to Malaysia. They're constantly displaced. And I think the sentiment that is shared is that we just want to go back home and solve all of this. But it is impossible without all of your help. It is impossible without the country, basically establishing a relative peace, without the military being in the picture. And that also includes, getting rid of their ideology, which is something that is not very easy to do. Their ideology seeps deep into, the cultural relevance and the structure of the society in Myanmar Burma. To this day, even in the civil society led organizations, civil society in Myanmar Burma, these sentiments are alive and well. Exclusionary language, for example, constantly happens. We're often told what to do and where to stand or where to be in this movement of democratization or trying to actualize federalism. And I've witnessed this, and so did many of my sisters, including Mawe Renu. We've just seen it happen so much that we're extremely exhausted. But our work continues. I don't think that there should be retaliation against the individuals that were just mentioned, who are in the NUG, but I do not think that they're fit for office. And I will leave it at that. In terms of the sentiment, again, people are not happy where they are. They want to go back home. They need better, they need better to actually survive and thrive as a community. We've lost too much of our human capital. We've lost too much of our people already, who've basically had to innovate and find a way to survive in restrictive conditions. And I think that there is a way out of this if the international community truly listen to us and actually provide us the ability to lead, these initiatives, rather than showing us the plans that are already put in place without actually consulting us in the first place. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. I wonder if other speakers, panelists, has any thing to respond to those questions. There's a questions around hate speech against the refugees. The questions around the NUG's minister ministers and the questions around the return of the refugees. All right, then I guess I will take, there's two more questions I would like to, Shana, did you like to say anything? No? Okay. So there's one question specifically to Nicholas. I think it's from Alexandra Horseman. I hope I'm pronouncing correct. For the ICC case, I like to ask Nicholas how the court wants to bring victims to the court to provide the evidence, and how the court protect the victims. How do you see perspective to issue arrest warrants, a warrant against Mae Aung Hlaing? And there is another question. I'm still angry with those who stayed silent about the genocide or actually supported it. Now they are claiming they were misled. How do you feel about it? I think it's about the people involved. I mean, we always talk about that in the genocidal society, there is it's not just one, it's not just the perpetrator, the people who provided orchestrators or directors of the genocide, but also there are people, other people involved, politicians, academics, media, etc., even people who were in positions of power in the governments. And now some of them started to apologize, and which is a great thing, but then they were not apologizing genuinely, but they were saying they were misled and they were also victims. So what's your opinion around that? I think it's also linked to the questions around what does justice mean for the Rohingya, as well as what does it means to be genuine reconciliations and transitional justice. I hope if you guys provide some response to that, that would be great. Thank you. Should we start with Nicholas?
Sure, thank you. So victims have a very important role at the International Criminal Court. Of course, in any criminal trial, the ICC holds criminal trials where it's saying that an individual is responsible, criminally responsible for the crimes that happened, that they did something to order the crimes, they themselves perpetrated the crimes, they shot or raped someone, or they helped plan it or aided and abetted in some way the crime occurring. So to do that, of course, they have to present the evidence, and it comes from witnesses who talk about what they saw and heard. And sometimes, and many times, those are the victims about what happened to them. And they play an important role as witnesses. They also, though, at the International Criminal Court, victims have their own representation. Their victims are participants in the trial, represented by a lawyer, a group of lawyers. And they may sometimes come and watch, but also through their lawyers, they may express their opinion about things like what justice would mean for them or how the court should act in the trial. Now, the protecting of witnesses, including victims, is something I know the ICC, like all the international courts, puts a lot of emphasis on. They have their own sections that concentrate on that. And there are various tools that they have, but I don't want anyone to think that they are infallible. There are limits to what they can do, but there are certain measures that protect witnesses, such as withholding information about the witness until very close to the trial, or in some cases, keeping the witness's name, their appearance, their video of them is blurred, and their voice can be distorted so that the public doesn't know who it is that is testifying. And there can be some redactions about the location where the witness is, so the defense doesn't know, or the other parties don't know where the witness is located. So there are different measures to protect victims and other witnesses at the International Criminal Court. And those are very, very important. And our mechanism, when we work with witnesses, we also have no police force or ability ourselves to provide physical protection, but we work with states to try to do what we can to keep people safe in a place that's safe and so that they are protected. And then I think there were some questions about, well, there was the one question earlier about what do the Rohingya want? And I'm not, of course, Rohingya, but I've talked to them many times. And I think like everyone else on this call, what I hear consistently, what do you want? Or if you ask them, what is justice? They usually start with going home. So there's no question that justice for the community means to go back to the place where they were born, where their parents were born, and to have what they ask for is to have a normal life, to have the rights that all of us enjoy, to live and to have education and to pursue our economic activities the same as all of the neighbors, with normal rights of people that live in the country. So that I think is what is an important part of justice, that any result that would hope to have justice in this case would have to include that, the ability to go home and live a dignified, safe life.
Thank you, Nicholas. And any other panelists want to respond to the questions?
There also was a question about an arrest warrant. Let me just quickly talk about that. So the International Criminal Court can issue an arrest warrant. All the states that belong to the court are obligated by the treaty that they signed to enforce the orders of the court for the arrest warrant. So there's about 200 countries that are members of the International Criminal Court. And then we've seen in other occasions that other states sometimes also support the International Criminal Court on certain cases and can work with them on an arrest. But an arrest is not guaranteed, and many times fugitives from international justice have hidden or just avoided the court's warrants for many, many years. But also in many cases that eventually they were captured. So someone like Charles Taylor was indicted when he was president, and it took 6 years. He was living in Nigeria for many years, and then he was eventually arrested. Slobodan Milosevic was president of Yugoslavia when he was indicted. No one thought he would be arrested, but a couple of years later, he was arrested. And people like General Mladic and Karadzic hid for more than 10 years, but eventually they were arrested and brought to the court.
Thank you very much. Very insightful. And any other response from our panelists around the people who may be complicit or directly or indirectly, or any other questions that we had before?
I was hoping to answer very briefly about the transitional justice question. I have been a proponent, and this is something that's shared among many community members, that transitional justice need to include us obviously at the beginning of the work. The transitional justice that happened or did not happen, did not take place with proper procedure in place during the initial democratization process, lacked Rohingya involvement. And that is why it failed. That is why the peace process failed. That is why the ceasefires failed. Inclusion is a very, very important step, a very important first step that cannot be ignored. Now, I actually care a lot about the process that is called National Truth and Reconciliation. I don't think that as a country we can move on without actually dissecting where we've gone wrong as a country, at every level, in terms of why the genocide and mass atrocity takes place in the first place. So I think as a union, as a federalized democracy, we have a lot of work to do, even, after we get rid of the military power, or, getting rid of their ideology. There's much more work to be done. But the first step is to accept that we're all part of this failure. And it is important that our Burmese counterparts, even ethnic communities, have actually partaken in the genocidal process. And as Wei Wei had said in the previous, events and discussion, there's no genocide without a genocidal culture. And that still stands. That rings true every day, even in civil society space.
Thank you, Yasmin. So I guess before closing our discussions, our panel, I would like to maybe finally give panelists a time to reflect and provide a last note, 1 minute or so. I'm not sure if Nicholas is here. If he is here, I was hoping to ask what the UN Human Rights Council, UN General Assembly, or the UN Security Council can do to help to basically take the evidences and case that IAM has prepared to take it to next steps. Because I understand that the current prosecutions, investigations before the ICC is limited to the crimes of deportations. So to be able to prosecute entirety of the crime, what needs to be done? I am not sure if he's coming back. Hopefully, if he come back, he might be able to answer. If not, Andrea, Shayna, and Yasmin, what is your final words for the community? And there is one question: what is one thing that activists can do, and what is one thing that international government and community can do? If you can just elaborate in 1 minute with your magic, speaking skills, please do.
I don't mind going first. Well, thank you again, Wei Wei, for organizing this, and thanks everyone for joining. I think just as a final note, just remembering that mass atrocities and genocide, they often hit newspapers or they hit public awareness in a very brief moment of time, and it's often extremely violent acts that kind of capture everyone's attention, and that makes a lot of sense. But I think it's important for all of us to know that there's a long lead up to crimes, and that often is unseen. And there's a lot more work that we can be doing to recognize early warning signs and encourage discussion. I think a lot of policymakers, governments have a crisis mindset, and there's always a crisis to focus on. But I think it would do us a lot of good to look at where we see persecution, where we see ongoing or systematic human rights violations, and trying to address those early on so that we are not always in a crisis response. And then similarly, maybe this goes to the question about hate speech against Rohingya today, and I think what Yasmin mentioned is this kind of genocidal culture, that this environment of hate that allows mass violence to be committed. I think just recognizing the long tail end, that even after extremely violent events, that there still is not only trauma for survivors, but there are ongoing risks to people. And a lot of the systems, the structures, the mindsets that allowed for mass violence to occur still exist afterwards. And so I just think it would do a lot of good for governments, but also civil society, for donors, for researchers, to expand our aperture to not only look at extreme acts of violence, but to look at what happens before, and to look at the needs ongoing in the future.
Thank you, Andrea. Shayna?
Hi, sure. Thanks. And thanks all the other panelists for all of your extremely thoughtful and insightful contributions. I guess to respond to some of the questions and also pick up on particularly what Yasmin was just discussing around the question of what some of the recent apologies that we've seen from the NUG and others can mean and how we can sort of move forward. Yes, what Win Myat A and others have said is true, that the military obviously was the main perpetrator of the 2017 atrocities and was responsible for carrying out this massive, propaganda campaign around the country. But there hasn't been real kind of acknowledgement of the role that civilian authorities played over the years in propping up the system of apartheid that was established and continues to exist today in Rakhine State. And, as we have lessons from around the world in situations of mass atrocities and genocide and crimes against humanity, you can't move forward into processes of truth and reconciliation and justice without naming what happened and acknowledging, the agency that different actors and players had. So I think, if we want to try and move forward into a different sort of, representation of what like a multi-ethnic, multi-religious represented body can look like, that reckoning needs to happen.
Great points. Great. Thank you, Shana. And Yasmin, lastly, not the least.
I don't have much to say except trying to conclude my hopes after this event. I know we get to talk a lot about different action items, but I'm hoping that we can focus on particular one, and this is to fellow activists and those who advocate in this space. Perhaps challenge yourself to actually think about deconstruction of the superiority or the complex that we often perpetrate among ourselves. This is just taking accountability for ourselves. And I've said this in another event before, but can you try referring to Arakan as Arakan State instead of Rakhine State, because that is the name that the Burmese military actually placed and imposed to ensure that actually it represents everybody, because it also includes Rohingya, not just Rakhine people. That would be a challenge. There are other ways you can also challenge, but perhaps this would be a good beginning. Another thing that I would have as a last word for the international community and those who are watching, who work in this field, is to ensure that you're inclusive enough in your process of working with Rohingya in every space that involves Myanmar Burma. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists. And I guess, this has been really enlightening and insightful for all of us. And I hope it does the same to our audience as well. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today and for giving your time. And now I would like to proceed with our closing activities. And to begin, I'd like to invite actually our sister Shekufa to provide a closing remark. Sister Shekufa, you have the floor. And we also had our sister Lucky, but she unfortunately had to leave for another meeting. So Sister Shekufa, the floor is yours.
Thank you for giving me a chance and inviting. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shekufa, a genocide survivor from refugee camp, Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. I am very pleased and honored to be here with you all today. And I feel it is an opportunity for me to share you all about our sufferings and concerns. The day 25 August is a remarkable, unforgettable, and Rohingya Genocide Remembrance Day. So every year we mark it, realizing the atrocities and violence committed to us by Myanmar military. After Myanmar military crackdown in Northern Rakhine State in 2017, we had to flee our motherland. Bangladesh hosted us, our 1 million Rohingya. We first thank to Bangladesh government and the local people. It has been 6 years in refugee camp. We are facing many challenges to survive life. The life in refugee camp is so hard and insecure for mostly women. The camp communities, particularly women, suffer from sanitation and hygiene issues, primarily lack of clean water and clean supplies. Because of this, illness and disease can easily spread through the entire population in camp. Emergency patients, pregnant women face than others because there is limited resources and healthcare services in camp. One of the major issue is lack of formal education system of children in camps. We need to emphasize it because the future generation must be granted education opportunities. By the way, crimes and violence increasing in refugee camp because every few job opportunity and livelihood access in different locations of the camp are available only. The domestic problem, early marriage, and human trafficking are increasingly seen. Moreover, the natural disasters like fire incidents, flood, landsliding are almost every year affected to us. Humanitarian support for those victims never reach on time. But lately, women and children mostly die with the fire incidents and landsliding. You might also know that cutting food ration by WFP for the vulnerable people in camp may create a devastating situation and hostile environment. We are no longer hoping to survive life in camp because tolerating refugee life is very hard in real life, because in every break, sorry. Sorry.
Hello, Sister Shekuf, are you there?
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah, please continue.
Another one disturbing me. Different camp environment. We are no longer hoping to survive in life in camp because tolerating refugee life is very hard in real life. In every breath, we realize how precious our country is to us. Our hope is home. However, we are worried if we are forced to the genocide battleground with our safety and security, because Arkan is still unsafe. We need global attention fully so that we can return home with sustainable solution. Myanmar perpetrators must be accountable for the crimes committed to us. Myanmar must be sanctioned and accountable for justice. The efforts towards accountability are for all people in Myanmar who are facing similar atrocities, crimes by the perpetrators. We can never forget the day. We need justice. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sister Shekufa. Just give us a second. We were trying to figure out a video clip. So yeah, thank you very much, Sister Sheikh, for all your powerful remark and explanations and sharing your experiences with us. Thank you so much. Indeed, 6 years since the attacks of genocide against our community, it is time for actions. Today, we are reminded by our distinguished experts and leaders that practical steps toward a just, sustainable, and durable solution must involve actions. And we heard these actions must be immediate, comprehensive, coordinated, and concerted on the voices and needs and agencies of the ethnic Rohingya, especially Rohingya women. And in these sessions, I would like to present a video remark from Tom Andrews, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situations of human rights in Myanmar. And lastly, on behalf of the WPN and Rohingya Women Organizing Committee, I once again thank you, our esteemed speakers and guests for your time today. And thank you for standing for the persecuted. I hope to see you again. So let's figure out to show the video. Okay. Yes, we got it. I guess I will share my screen, and it's here. Okay.
It is an honor to participate in this important event that is being organized by the Women's Peace Network and the Rohingya Women's Organizing Committee, and is being held on the 6th anniversary of the genocidal attacks against the Rohingya in Myanmar. The Rohingya were attacked by the Myanmar military, not because of anything that they had done, but because of who they are and the God they pray to. Over the 6 years since these horrific attacks, Rohingya leaders and advocates, including women, have been working tirelessly for justice, accountability, and for the safety and sustainability of the Rohingya community, who continue to be denied fundamental rights and continue to face terrible hardships. They have been giving voice to the particular injustices and hardships faced by Rohingya women and girls, elevating their visibility and highlighting their uniquely valuable perspective on the crisis and what can and should be done about it. All too often, these leaders and advocates have faced denial and indifference by those who are in positions to make a difference. Government officials who have all too often been content to issue vacuous statements or vote for resolutions that have no consequences. Let me be frank. The members of the Rohingya community who I have spoken with are tired of empty promises. Their children cannot eat political rhetoric or countless UN resolutions that go nowhere. I agree that this Rohingya genocidal commemoration that we are all participating in should be a time for reflection, for inclusivity, and for solidarity. But I also believe that this should be a time for action. Action that can make a genuine difference for the besieged Rohingya community. Action that holds government leaders to account for not holding those responsible for a genocide to account. An action that demands that the Rohingya community, who have suffered so much, be provided the sustainable support that they and their children need and deserve. It has been 6 years, and the international community has yet to take effective, strategic, and coordinated action against those who are responsible for the Rohingya genocide, the Myanmar military. Indeed, the senior general who commanded the forces who committed those genocidal attacks is now commanding forces that are committing probable war crimes and crimes against humanity throughout Myanmar. As I have argued before the UN Human Rights Council and the General Assembly, it is imperative that Min Aung Hlaing and his collaborators and enablers be denied the three things that sustain their atrocities: money, weapons, and legitimacy, and that he and they face justice. I believe that it is past time for the UN Security Council to consider, debate, and vote on a resolution that imposes sanctions and an arms embargo on the military junta while referring them to the International Criminal Court to face justice. Such a resolution will almost certainly face a veto in the Security Council. But I nevertheless believe that the Rohingya need and deserve to have this debate in the Security Council, and that the members of the Council should be required to cast their votes and explain their votes before the world. But strong, effective action does not require passage of a UN Security Council resolution. Those nations who support justice, human rights, and accountability for the Rohingya, and all those who are under siege of Myanmar, have an opportunity, and I believe an obligation, to form a working coalition to take strong, coordinated action that will deny the military junta of Myanmar what it requires to sustain itself. What is missing is not a lack of knowledge of what can and should be done, but the political will to get it done. Let us commemorate the 6th anniversary of the Rohingya genocide by honoring those who lost their lives in that war, saluting and thanking Rohingya leaders and advocates, including Rohingya women leaders and advocates who are on the front lines of this struggle, and by committing ourselves to inclusivity, solidarity, and the action necessary for justice, human rights, and hope to prevail. Thank you.
Thank you. So finally, it's an honor to moderate this event today. And thank you to Rohingya Women Organizing Committee team, and as well as my team at WPN, and all of you joining today. And I wish you a very great day, a very good day, and hope to see you again, everybody. Goodbye.